Why the Ultimate Universe does some unnecessary stuff from time to time. Thor was forced to kill his supervillain's son to save America from civil war. But what's funny, well not funny, is that wasn't even the unnecessary part. So it begins in the aftermath of an event called Ultimatum, which we will get to much later on. Basically, Ultimate Thor ends up sacrificing his own life to save his lover, Valkyrie. While in the afterlife, in order to be reunited with and save Valkyrie, the goddess Hela makes Thor fight a whole army of undead soldiers, which he does. But then Thor asks what else he needs to do, and this goddess just starts undressing herself and demanding that Thor gives her a baby, which of course he does, and it doesn't even save Valkyrie. This comes back later with the child, Modi Thor's son, being raised by a much more villainous Loki, feeling abandoned and seeking revenge, trying to turn America into a new Asgard while wielding an Infinity Stone and forcing Thor to eventually strike down his own evil son. Number 9. Look what they did to my boy! Almost everyone loves Deadpool. Weirdly, even some moms love Deadpool. So when the gritty, realistic, mature Ultimate Universe was going to bring the character in, you'd expect it to be a match made in heaven. No! I blame this version of the character for the monstrosity we got 3 years later in 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. The Ultimate Marvel version of Deadpool was a sergeant in the military named Wadey Wilson. He's grim, he's angry, he's way too serious, and he also is an incredibly racist mutant hater. Oh, he was also a cyborg with incredible strength, he retained his signature healing factor, and instead of just being disfigured, he had no skin at all. And he's missing part of his skull, so his head is instead encased in a clear plastic case for everyone to see. Deadpool leads the Reavers, who are also racist, in trying to kill prominent mutants. Thankfully, Ultimate Deadpool was taken off the board by the 616 Deadpool in Deadpool Kills Deadpool in 2013. Number 8. Hank Pym needs to chill. Hank Pym has not really ever been that great of a dude. He has multiple untreated mental disorders and crazy insecurities that have caused him to do multiple not so great things in his time in the regular universe. But of course, everything in the Ultimate Universe gets ramped up a bit. Pym got involved in a very heated argument with his wife, Janet Van Dyne, over her friendship with Captain America. In Ultimates issue number 6, things start to get physical until the Wasp shrinks down to her smaller size to get away from her husband. Unfortunately, the terribly insecure Hank cornered her and sprayed her wasp-sized self with bug spray. She hid under a desk to catch her breath after inhaling the toxic fumes, while her husband just kept on with the emotional bombardment. But he didn't stop there. He then sent an army of ants after her until he realized what he was doing to his own wife. This stuff kind of boils my blood just a little bit. The fight resulted in Janet's very near death, her hospitalization, and his expulsion from the Ultimates. Number 7. Making the Maker. The Fantastic Four in the Ultimate Universe remained relatively the same, at least in their family dynamics. Their backstory was slightly modified, but overall the four main heroes lived as you'd expect, until it all went Marvel Ultimate-y. First off, Sue Storm and Reed Richards lost a child together, but then Reed Richards proposed to Susan Storm and she rejected his proposal. Just like that, the Fantastic Four was no more, but that's not the end. What came next, really quickly I might add, was Reed going absolutely bonkers, faking his death, de-lifing his family, planning alien terror plots around the world, being trapped in the negative zone where he primed his intellect by stretching his brain and skull, and he built an army. Since he was horribly burnt by the Human Torch, Reed took to wearing a helmet and founded the Children of Tomorrow, the Dark Ultimates, and he called himself the Maker. He became an incredibly evil Reed Richards. Number 6. Cap hates France? Look, despite the name, Captain America, Steve Rogers, is very much a protector of the world, not just America. So it was really odd when in Ultimates number 12 from Mark Miller, Brian Hitch, and Paul Neary, we see the Ultimate Marvel Universe Captain America verbally wailing on France, of all places. Captain America is caught in a fight with Herr Kleiser, an old German rival. Just for better context, Nick Fury is there too. Captain America is obviously the hero though, so eventually he gets the upper hand. It was just so odd that when Kleiser was pinned by Cap and asking for surrender, well, Cap digs his shield into the dude's stomach and says, "Surrender? Surrender? You think this letter on my head stands for France? The comment was kind of fueled by the time period it was written in, as the states were entering into a war and France refused to join them, leading to some anti-France feelings in the real world. But this World War II era dig at the country left a bad taste in pretty much everyone's mouth, especially from a character that is supposed to be much, much better than that. Number 5. Wolverine. Why are you so weird? Look, I'm gonna get into all the weirdness that is the Ultimate Universe Wolverine in a sec, but one thing that kind of immediately sticks out is how this version of Wolverine seems to repeatedly swing for ladies that are a little below his age bracket, or like a lot below, and always redheads, which I guess kind of checks out from the 616 version too. Jean Grey, Firestar, and the one we're talking about today, Mary Jane Watson. In Ultimate Spider-Man number 66, Wolverine and Peter Parker end up switching bodies after Wolverine makes some unwanted advances on the teenage Jean Grey, who psychically swapped their bodies. I don't know why she did that, but she did it. Wolverine finds some drawbacks, but apparently they pale in comparison to the perk that is the teenage Peter's girlfriend, Mary Jane. Wolverine tells MJ that he, in Peter's body, doesn't need to go to school, while also making some crude advances towards her as well. It comes off as kinda creepy and really cringy. Number 4. Wolverine. How you die. Now, on the topic of Wolverine, he himself has quite a few moments that make him kinda awesome and some that make him kinda horrible. Ultimate Wolverine is no longer feral, and he does not have the classic healing factor. Instead, he gets the survival factor, which is kind of a heck of a lot better. He can survive a heck of a lot, almost anything. S.H.I.E.L.D. chopped his body off, leaving only his head, and he breathed through his skin. They put his head in a vacuum and he went into stasis. Hulk ripped his body and threw it into another mountain range, and when Wolverine found that half, it was still fresh, no organ failure, no rot, and the blood was somehow still pumping. And he just put himself back together again with no issues. Ultimate Wolverine is unkillable by any means, no matter what you do. It was also implied that Ultimate Wolverine was the precursor of all mutants. He was sort of the first mutant in the world. So all the other mutants are basically products of Weapon X experimentation on Wolverine. On top of that, his blood could be synthesized into a substance that gives mutants insane power boosts. Marvel made Ultimate Wolverine insanely overpowered, and then they absolutely killed him in the stupidest way possible. He died because Magneto did a hand wave thingamajig, as someone on Reddit said, and apparently he destroyed every single one of Wolverine's cells while ripping out his adamantium. Number 3. Is this Game of Thrones? If you haven't noticed by some of the previous points, Marvel did a lot of unnecessary sexualizing of the Ultimate Universe. And to just push it a bit further into unnecessary odd choices made by Marvel for this universe, they included the incestuous relationship between the characters of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Somehow it actually feels worse than the one in Game of Thrones, maybe just because it was extremely shocking and the two characters never had anything even similar to this in the 616 continuity. Fans wondered whether it was really necessary for Mark Millar to pair the two characters together and questioned whether the twist added anything new to the story at all. Answer: it didn't. Probably the biggest issue with this revelation is that now the characters can't so much as look at each other without fans accusing the writers of returning to the incest plot from the Ultimate X-Men. Number 2. Blob. After the events of that ultimatum thing, which I'm so close to talking about, many heroes were taken out and or unaccounted for. One such hero would be Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. Now, as we know, Hank Pym, Ant-Man, was kind of the worst. And though a terrible husband, he still diligently looked for his missing wife. What he found instead was the villain the Blob feasting on her remains. It's probably one of the most striking images from the whole Ultimate Universe, but it just gets stranger and somehow worse. Enraged at the sight of it, Ant-Man converted to his giant man state and picked up the Blob in his giant hand and bit Blob's head clean off and spat it on the ground to the shock and horror of his teammates. And in at number 1 is Ultimatum. Ultimatum was supposed to be how the writers finished off the Ultimate Universe stories. Obviously it didn't turn out that way, but as you can tell from previous points, writers kinda just went a little haywire with things they would do with a dying universe story. Basically, Magneto, who has been a pretty brutal villain in this universe so far, goes even farther during the mega event where stakes were way high. Basically, after Magneto gains control of the hammer of Thor and is manipulated by none other than Dr. Doom, he messes with the magnetic pillars of the world, flipping them on their head and sending weather into a frenzy. The big event was a giant tsunami called the Ultimatum Wave that basically put New York underwater and brought a giant casualty list along with it. Bruce Banner drowns but the Hulk lives, the Wasp gets eaten, as mentioned before, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are killed off. In a bit more of a divisive move, while the X-Men are looking for their fallen teammates in the wake of the tidal wave in New York, Magneto pays a visit to Professor X and in a pretty brutal scene, snaps the professor's neck. Magneto also rips the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton and pretty much disintegrates him like we talked about before.
Number 10. Gah Lak Tus. The thing to remember about the Ultimate Universe is one of its mission statements was to offer a different look at the Marvel world that was more grounded in reality. Well, there were a few things they were trying to do, but this was one of the things among them. They also wanted the Ultimate Universe to be a stark contrast to the main continuity, and it seemed to favor more of a gritty or edgy take on Marvel canon, and it aimed to eliminate the unapproachable elements of Marvel Comics by making sure stories weren't bogged down by years of established history and continuity for characters and events. Which means that when you go to a comic shop, anyone that walks into that comic shop can pick up an Ultimate comic and be like, I know what's happening. This is easy. When it came to Galactus though, the reason he really had to be changed is because the idea of a cosmic giant with a weird hat who eats worlds in the Ultimate Universe, it's kinda silly. It doesn't feel very grounded in reality, does it? Instead, they turned Galactus into Gah Lak Tus, a drone army that devours worlds as a massive group of city-sized robots flying around space. Which honestly, it might also be more terrifying than the original version of this character. Gah Lak Tus has since merged with the original villain of 616, Galactus or Galen, so now it does look like a giant Galen still, which is a little unfortunate, but this also made the entity more powerful between both worlds, so still pretty scary, even though now kind of ruined the whole, getting rid of the silliness look. It's what happens when the Ultimate Universe dissolves and is folded back into sort of the main continuity. Number 9. Sue Storm and Ben Grimm. Sue Storm and Ben Grimm aren't generally the most shipped couple in the Marvel Universe, but that simply might be because Reed Richards is in their way. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, one of the cutest and most endearing relationships is actually the one between the two FF members. Here, Reed still held a flame for Sue, but when he proposed to her following Ultimatum, Sue, instead of accepting like in 616, actually said, nah, I'm gonna pass on that. This was part of what really messed up Reed, but also helped to bring Ben and Sue even closer, allowing a romance between them to blossom. In the Ultimate Universe, Ben and Sue get married, and they even have a daughter together. And friends, before we head on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you're loving our content here on Top 10 Nerd, be sure to head on over to Facebook where you can follow us, and where we'll have lots of fresh, cool things coming your way soon. So check it out so you're there first. Number 8. Death of Spider-Man. Well, the death of Spider-Man, the first time around, felt a little rough and brutal. When we took a second swing at it with Brian Michael Bendis building the narrative and giving it room to breathe, it actually ended up being one of the most powerful moments within the existence of the Marvel Ultimate Universe. Peter Parker as Spider-Man is a character you never expect to die, which is what makes it so shocking and painful when it happens, and it feels extremely permanent. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your take, we would learn later on that Peter actually was able to survive thanks to his powers' ties to the Oz formula. Still, Peter would basically decide to keep his resurrection and secret immortality a secret, and pass the torch of Spider-Man officially on to Miles Morales, who in the Ultimate Universe, and now also in Earth 616, is also Spider-Man. Number 7. Kitty Pryde and Peter Parker. Kitty Pryde and Peter Parker on paper kinda seem like a weird couple, but in the Ultimate Universe they really worked well together. In fact, I think Peter might actually be one of my favorite picks for Kitty in terms of relationships that we've had so far. Although I'm still holding out for Magic. I'm still holding out for Ilyana and Kitty to get together. Let's do it. Possibly, I actually like this relationship better than even that of Colossus and Kitty. At least that's my take. That's a very personal opinion, and I'm sure, it's a preference or not for folks. So if you out there are Colossus and Kate shipper, that's fine. You can do that too. Together, the pair not only had fun as teenagers, but they also teamed up to fight crime, which was pretty cool. Sadly, their relationship did not last forever, and the pair did break up after Peter realized that he really wanted to be with Mary Jane instead. Ooh. While he would also seemingly die young, Kitty would still remember him fondly even as she grew up, lingering on what could have been if they had stayed together. Although she'd never confess her thoughts and dreams about their hypothetical life together. She kept those to herself. So sad. Number 6. Thor. Thor is another fascinating take on a character we feel we know so well. Although in the end, Thor did turn out to be Thor Odinson, son of Odin, who was made to forget his true identity on Earth. For a good while, we weren't so sure that was the case. Also, saying Thor Odinson, son of Odin is such a weird thing to say because you're kind of saying Thor, son of Odin, son of Odin. The reason why we were so eager to believe that, hey, maybe Thor isn't actually Thor is that the Ultimate Universe was touted and marketed as being a fresh take and less bogged down continuity-wise to that of Earth 616 and their characters. So we were like, hey, maybe they are reinventing this status quo. Thor initially appeared to be a delusional man who believed he was Thor but was kinda like out of his mind. For his power, he heavily relied on weaponry and his suit to produce thunder and lightning, which allowed him to appear godlike. However, in the end we learned that Thorleif Goldman really was Thor Odinson, but had been manipulated into forgetting his true identity more clearly. The character design alone here is enough to make Ultimate Thor one of my favorite things about this universe. Number 5. The Spider-Men meet. For many years, Marvel did their best to keep Ultimate completely separate from Earth 616, but eventually, the inevitable crossover between the worlds had to happen. We all knew eventually it would come around. The really cool thing about this though, it brought together Earth 616 Spider-Man Peter Parker with Miles Morales' Spider-Man from Earth 1610. Not only that, but Peter would also get to learn about his own seemingly unfortunate fate in this reality and cross paths once more with a living Gwen Stacy, who in the Ultimate Universe dies but is reborn again thanks to the lab-created being which killed her in the first place, Carnage. And for a time she even gets to be Carnage, which I thought was pretty cool. Short-lived though. Number 4. Colossus' secret. Colossus and Kitty don't end up together like how they do in the main continuity. Instead, Colossus is revealed to have a secret here when it comes to his sexual identity. Turns out the Colossus vs 1610 is actually gay. The challenge of him living as a closeted gay man makes him an even more interesting character in the Ultimate Universe, adding another layer of what it can be like to feel other, in addition to Colossus already being a mutant, so that's a huge part of his backstory as well. Colossus does get outed, but considering how masculine of a character he is, and how burly, he also provides a more diverse look when it comes to how gay men are usually depicted in mainstream comics. There are some that are burly, but definitely not enough. I feel like we need to diversify that a little bit. Number 3. Kitty Pryde leads the X-Men. I am a big Kitty Pryde fan, as you may have garnered from all my time spent hyping the current heroic Marauders mutant team, and Kate's place as their leader. Not to mention her new look as well. I am here for it. When it comes to Ultimate, she's another character who does not disappoint us. Even after her teenage years, which were pretty fun with her dating and fighting crime alongside Spider-Man, which we talked about earlier, Kitty becomes somehow even cooler and definitely a lot tougher. After the devastating and earth-shattering events of Ultimatum, Kitty would go on to become the leader of the surviving mutant nation and the leader of the X-Men team besides. At least the X-Men who choose to stay with her and follow her as a leader. Of which, were I an Ultimate Universe mutant, I would be one of. I would be here to join Kitty's team. Definitely. For sure. Let's also acknowledge that Kitty becomes the leader after she has lost almost everything in the wake of Ultimatum, losing many friends and loved ones who were closest to her. Kitty is strong. Number 2. The creation of the Maker. One of my all-time favorite characters that we've gotten from the Ultimate Universe has to be the Maker. The Maker is one of the best villains within and without Earth 1610, as he happens to be one of the few characters who made the move over from 1610 to Earth 616 after that universe was seemingly destroyed. That's how you know he's cool. Although don't worry, the Maker does appear to be working to restore the Ultimate Universe and has since brought that world back. What's even more wild is that initially the Maker was none other than hero and leader of the Fantastic Four, Reed Richards, proving just how rewarding and refreshing it can be to try something totally different with an established and widely predictable character. Also, I feel like I like Reed better as a villain. I feel like I like his Ultimate Universe counterpart better. Is that a hot take? I don't know. I don't think so. I think a lot of people feel this way. Number 1. Miles Morales unmasks. One of the greatest characters we've gotten out of the Ultimate Universe, other than the Maker, obviously, has to be Miles Morales. He also happens to be one of the few characters who has stood the test of time when it comes to surviving the destruction of his home universe, reality of Earth 1610. Instead of dying with many of the other residents of the Ultimate Universe, Miles ended up being saved and even returned once more on Earth 616, where he was permanently moved to after the events of Secret Wars. I mean, come on. You know you're cool when you get moved from an alternate reality to the main one, just to save you and your family. Miles unmasking was a huge moment for Marvel as they introduced us to a biracial Spider-Man who is not only a stand-up hero, but is also just a really solid character all of his own, as opposed to being a carbon copy of Peter Parker's Spider-Man, which I feel like there's going to be some people in the comments who are going to be like, I think he is a carbon copy, but I really don't think he is. think Miles has a lot of different stuff going on. It's definitely not usually as negative as Peter. No offense, Peter, still love you. Number 10, Baby Inheritors. We've gone into the Spider-Verse multiple times in the comics now, and we are about to go back again. Supposedly one last time. We'll see what happens. But I'm sure nothing can top the weirdness of how the last Spider-Man multiversal crossover ended. In the first Spider-Verse in the comics, the Inheritors were the group of villains that the Spider Totems of the multiverse had to band together to fight. At the end of that event, they defeated them, but then oddly enough, they returned again via Superior Spider-Man, aka Otto Octavius' tech. The Inheritors managed to clone themselves and make a comeback in Spider-Geddon, once more uniting the Spider Army to come together and defeat their threat to the multiverse. The Inheritors are basically energy vampires who specifically prey on animal or insect-inspired totemic beings, like Spider Totems. Spider Totems are basically people across the multiverse with spider-like powers and abilities who were destined to become spider-themed heroes and protect their world. At the end of Spider-Geddon, the Inheritors are defeated by being turned into baby versions of themselves and given to Spider-Man, Aunt May of Earth 3123, to raise to be good. Because that's how you defeat villains sometimes. Sometimes you just gotta raise them yourself. Number 9, Feed Me Plasma. One of the weirdest things, especially here on the internet, is everyone's obsession with Morbius feeding on plasma and not human blood. I mean, the amount of times I've talked about Morbius drinking blood and people on the internet have been like, actually it's plasma. It's an insane amount. People really love the plasma. This doesn't actually come from the comics though, but instead is something that grew out of the Spider-Man animated series. And it came to be thanks to censorship, of course, like with so many weird things that we have, because isn't that just always the way? Morbius, being a vampire on basically a children's animated series, wasn't allowed to be shown feeding on blood because it was considered too violent. So instead they had Morbius thirst for plasma. That way you can get around the whole blood thing, although plasma of course, it's in blood. Plasma is the liquid portion of your blood that contains mainly water as opposed to the other portions of your blood, which is primarily made up of red and white blood cells as well as platelets. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list here and you are loving what we do on the channel, please head on over to Facebook. You can follow us there and we have more exciting content coming your way and some exclusive things planned for you in the future, we hope. Number 8, Fin Fang Foom's diaper. Speaking of censorship, I have another strange one for you. This one comes from the comics, and we have the Comics Code Authority to thank for it, of course. Thanks, CCA. Thank you so much. Fin Fang Foom is a dragon that is well known in the comics. Recently in the MCU, we actually thought Fin Fang Foom might appear in Shang-Chi based on merch, only to learn that the dragon there was actually instead known as the Great Protector, so that was not Fin Fang Foom. In the comics, I recently saw Fin Fang Foom in the pages of Marauders, where he pops up before the original team dissolved, with Iceman actually fighting Foom before deciding to take a vacation from his work on the team, eventually leaving the Marauders completely once they rebooted that series. Well, I mean, at least he's gone for now. Bobby might be back later, but for now, he's out. Fin Fang Foom has years of history, and a good chunk of those years he spent in a purple diaper. Why? Because the CCA was worried about the dragon's indecent exposure. I'm not joking here, guys. That's what they were like. They're like, he's gotta wear pants. He's out there, he's naked. And it is for the reason of dragon modesty that he was forced to wear his iconic purple diaper or boxers or shorts, depending on, of course, who's drawing him and, you know, how you, as the person reading and looking at the comic, want to interpret that garment that he was forced into wearing. Number 7, hand suckers on the hands. If you thought the plasma thing was weird, it only really gets weirder when it comes to Morbius in the Spider-Man animated series. In the animated series, Morbius not only needed plasma instead of just straight up blood to live, but he also had fangs that basically went unused. I know what you're thinking, but wait a minute, Amanda, hold up! Don't vampires feed on their victims using their fangs? Yes, in folklore, they're either actually using their fangs to rend the flesh of their victims so they can basically feast on their blood, or in some cases, they actually even feed through their fangs using their especially long and pointed incisors like we would a straw. And in some cases, fangs have sort of like venom in them that sort of subdues their victim, depending on, you know, which type of vampire we're talking about from lore. However, in the animated series, while Morbius does have fangs, he doesn't really use them to feast. In that respect, they are more there for visual clarity and effect. Instead, Morbius has tentacle-like suckers on his hands, which is how he feeds. Weird? You betcha. Number 6, Clone Saga. Some people love it, some people hate it, but if you had to collect it or organize it into a trade, all of us were likely confused by it. Even to this day, the Clone Saga remains a hard story to follow because it spanned so many different Spider-Man comics, and because We had so many Spider-Man comics. The Clone Saga is a story where Spider-Man ends up being cloned by his nemesis, the Jackal, and then upon meeting his clones begins to question if he is actually the original Peter Parker or merely a clone himself. A lot of people are not fans of the Clone Saga because of the story's twist at the end, which many felt made the emotional investment that they had put in during the crossover story feel worthless in the end. Number 5. Mutants No More. What would a weirdest things list for Marvel be without me mentioning my extreme dislike of Brotherhood of Evil Mutants originating members Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver being retconned as non-mutants. This all went down in Axis, where it was revealed via a retcon that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver had never truly been mutants or Magneto's children, but were basically tricked into thinking so based on the High Evolutionary experimenting on them when they were young. Once the High Evolutionary was done with them, he discarded them, disguising them genetically as mutants. Wanda found out about this when she attempted to put a blood curse on her relatives, only to discover that it worked on Pietro, but not on Eric. So yes, Eric is not the father, but he still basically was with them the whole time and then was like, by the way, I'm your dad, and now he's not. I think we can still count it, even though they're not blood related, but they should be blood related. It hurts my brain. Number 4. Ultimate Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. One of the weirdest things that we've seen to this day comes from the recesses of the Marvel multiverse. Because of course it does. The Ultimate Universe is the universe of Earth 1610, which was created to be its own world and separate line from the main continuity, focused on making Marvel Comics more accessible to new fans while offering established fans a fresh take on their favorite characters, many of which were either more grounded or gritty or some combination of those two. In the case of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, I definitely say we got something unique, but not in a good way. While Wanda and her brother Pietro have always been close in the 616 continuity, 1610 took this to another level, with the two siblings having an implied romantic relationship. Yeah, not necessarily what we expected or wanted from a fresh take on these characters. Number 3. Vision loves Scarlet Witch because of Ultron? This is a weird theory that some people have in relation to Wanda and Ultron in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The belief here is that Vision, who was made by Ultron, loves Wanda, not necessarily because of his own feelings developing for her, although this does make a lot of sense just because, you know, his character development and that is what happens in the story, but because Ultron himself perhaps had feelings for Wanda. And as crazy as this theory sounds, and perhaps non-foundational as it sounds in relation to what goes on in those movies, the reality is it could be true, and here is why. In the Ultimate Universe, which serves to inspire much that we see in the MCU, Ultron is in love with Wanda, and it isn't any hidden love either. It's laid out in plain sight. Even weirder, obviously, is that Wanda isn't interested, as she is with her brother at the time, and Wanda's spurning of Ultron is what also apparently helps to turn him into a killer robot. Yeah, it's very different. Very fresh. Number 2. Ruins. The multiverse is full of disturbing realities, but none so disturbing, I don't think, as Ruins. Marvel's Ruins was created by Warren Ellis, with beautifully haunting artwork by Therese and Cliff Nielsen and Chris Moeller. The story that allows us to see into this world is only 2 issues in length, and yet based on the content in here, it does feel much longer. This is because Marvel Ruins is a parody of the Marvel Universe, where Ellis imagines what the heroes and villains would be like in the real world. It's bleak and disturbing, with many superpowers being practically explored in a way that turns them into more of a curse than a blessing. Number 1. Sins Past. Maybe one of the weirdest things in all of the cosmos and across multiple realities actually comes from the main reality of Earth 616. This awful thing has since been retconned away, but it still happened, and you can still go back and read it, and likely be traumatized by reading it upon doing so. That's right, we are talking about Sins Past. In this story, Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn were given added history. Doesn't sound so bad, yeah? Until you learn that this added history involved them being in a relationship together, a secret relationship where Norman got Gwen pregnant and was her first intimate lover. And as a result of their affair, they had 2 twin children who grew up to become goblins themselves. That's all I got. That's it, man. I'm just gonna throw my hands up to that because that's insane. Initially, of their children, Gabriel was known as Grey Goblin, and later on both Sarah and Gabriel will disguise themselves as the villain known as Kindred, which happened more recently in the comics. Don't worry though, we'd later learn that these two were actually just unstable clones, as opposed to being the true naturally born children of Gwen and Norman and their love affair, who fortunately were re-retconned as having never been romantically together. Thank goodness. Thank you, Nick Spencer. Thank you for fixing it.